maybe
we think we're streaming now? I'll close it.
Refresh that.
Yeah, just refresh.
Yeah,
Okay. Let me just do this. Okay. Is it that? Yeah, that's the last stream. That's you.
Great, yeah,
You recognize yourself?
I do.
No. That's the last stream. That's you.
Great, yeah,
You recognize yourself? Thank you.
I do.
That's the last stream. That's you.
Great, yeah,
You recognize yourself? Thank you.
I do.
So, sorting, 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 sorting. Live stream's a little late today, sorry about that. But we're gonna do something to start us off on a good foot here. Burn a little agarbatti. Incense here, this particular one is lemongrass. Beautiful. Technology hasn't evolved to the point where you can actually smell it, but most people know what lemongrass sounds like. And most people know what incense is. And the mess that it sometimes makes. Supposed to tell them that it's not a shitty show. That makes them want to go up. So, sorting. What exactly is the point? Well, in some ways, sorting is about what artists have to do whenever they're looking at what their archive is about, what they want to leave behind, what was important, what seems to be important to leave till after their passing. But it's not just about artists, because everybody's sorting all the time. Everybody's sorting their objects in their home or in their car or on the street, wherever they live. And everybody's sorting their ideas and their thoughts, even sorting their friends, sorting their feelings. Feelings arise, we don't necessarily know what they mean, but we have to put them somewhere, live through them and then put them somewhere, transform them sometimes. But it's all a process of sorting all the time. So it's not just artists who need to do it, and it's not just archives that are involved. It's kind of a universal thing. In the art world, sorting is also about curating. Who is the persons that get to decide what is art and what is not? Who are the persons that get to decide what is good art, worthy of contemplation, worthy of art reviews, worthy of articles, worthy of being considered for shows, and so on. Critics as well. Art critics help to make those decisions. And so the whole of all the art produced and the production of art that's done by all kinds of people is sorted into that kind of art that belongs in theaters and on stages or in galleries, or one way or another is designated as appropriate for public presentation. And then there's a whole lot of art. I don't know if it's actually art, but cultural production, artistic production, the results of artistic practice, the remnants of artistic practice that never is exhibited or presented or put on a stage or in a gallery. Does that make it any less art? Does that make it any less meaningful? Is art art if nobody sees it or experiences it, reads it, listens to it? How many unpublished manuscripts exist in the world? And yet they're sorted. People do all this stuff and they make all this stuff. All of us make stuff, even if it's not considered art, even in the making, because of the cultural form that's used to create it. It's nevertheless the result of a creative practice. And the question of who gets to decide has a lot to do with the sensibility and the sentimentality that we have for particular artists. So if Picasso wrote on a napkin and that napkin surfaces 100 years later, it probably would be exhibited in a gallery. I've been to lots of places in the world that show the studio of famous artists, and it's left, more or less intact or recreated somewhere. And as if their brushes or their manuscripts or their drawings were sacred and now are worthy of looking at, even though they're just drawings. They're just brushes. And yet somehow, because the artist has an iconic status, that raises it to the level of people paying money to look at it. It becomes their entire life, their entire being, their brand, if you will, becomes a commodity. I lived a few times actually for 6-7 months at a time in a small village in the south of France on the Côte Vermignon, a little place called Collioure. It's near Perpignan. And they market themselves, this little beautiful little village right on the Mediterranean, as the home, the origins of Fauvism. And they have, placards of Matisse and a little tour that you can take with the Fauvists and walk around. So the practice of individual artists, over 100 years ago now, has become a kind of branding for Collioure to use as a tourist attraction. There's no particular museum or anything. There's no opportunity to look at the work because the work is spread out all over in the museums of the world. But what they're marketing is, look, they were here, they stood on this ground. This is the building they lived in where they painted the harbor, or whatever. So that's a kind of sorting too. It takes place after an artist's death. As we all know, many artists die without anything. They die penniless and destitute. Probably the most famous example of that is Vincent van Gogh, and how his work is worth literally tens of millions of dollars, maybe these days even hundreds of millions of dollars. So the sorting is not just done by the person and the artist and the legacy of the artist, but it's done by those who come afterwards and designate what is meaningful art and what is not, what is worth it as a commodity on the market, when the work itself may have never been chosen or made to be a commodity, or maybe to be a commodity within a certain context. Like, I'm making a painting, I'll put it in the salon, I'll sell it for a few hundred francs, but never for millions or tens or hundreds of millions. That process by which objects have value in the marketplace, Karl Marx called that exchange value. And the exchange value of objects is something that in a capitalist society becomes really, really important, especially when we're, quotations, shopping, and we're looking to get value for the commodity that we're buying. And that value is an exchange value. It's what something is worth in the context of an economy. But there's also our relationship to objects in terms of use value. A fork is not just something that sells for $3 or 50 cents or $500. It's something that we can actually use. It has a value. A piece of clothing has a value. A bicycle has a value. And that value is created by the environment we live in. By environment, I don't mean like the ecology. I mean the context, the socio-economic, the socio-political environment that we live in. And we need objects to do certain things. We need tools, we need vehicles, we need clothing, we need food. So they have a use value and an exchange value, and this kind of way of thinking about it, use value implied by the environment and exchange value implied by the economy, has been a kind of dialectical way of understanding our relationship to objects. And what I propose as an artist, as a cultural worker, is that there is a third way of understanding our relationship to objects, and that's provided by culture. And that value is what I would call symbolic value. So if we have an object, here's a water bottle, for example. It obviously has a use value. I can drink from it, carry water around with me, very useful. Drink it. It has an exchange value. I'm not sure, I don't think I actually paid for this. I think I might have got it for free in a swag bag or something. But let's say it has a value, just for the sake of argument, of $10. It's a good water bottle. It keeps things cold and or hot. So it has a use value, it has an exchange value, but also has a symbolic value. It has a relationship to me now because I don't really think of it that I own it, but I'm taking care of it. I'm the steward of this water bottle here. And I like to travel with it because it's a good water bottle. And if I were to lose it, I'd be disappointed. I would actually try to find it, try to understand what happened to it. And that's just something simple like a water bottle. But what about, let's say, I don't know, a photograph, a physical photograph of a place or a person like this? What is that worth? It has a use value. It has minimal economic exchange value, but it has a symbolic value, and especially so if someone gave it to us, or especially so if we received it in a certain kind of context. So, for example, here, This is a crab shell, which I actually found myself on a beach close to where I live. And that crab shell has very little exchange value. I'm positive that I wouldn't be able to sell it to anyone. It doesn't really have a use value. It's just a crab shell that I don't actually use it anyway. But it has a great symbolic value because I remember the day when I found it. It was with my father-in-law, who's no longer with us, who doesn't even live out here, but came for a visit and was totally enthralled by this beach because the tide was way, way out. And together we went looking for sand dollars and other things we could find, and this is one of the things we found. A crab shell. So I have an attachment to it that is based on a symbolic value. You could even say, if you were being cynical, that it's a sentimental value. It is a sentimental value. I don't have a problem understanding it that way. I do have a problem with my inability to let go of things that have sentimental values. Here, for example, are the various COVID tests that I've done during COVID. And you can see, I don't know, maybe if you get close, they're all mostly negative tests. But there are two that are positive tests. And those two are the two times in which I had COVID. Both my partner and I had COVID, and it wasn't fun. And so my thing is, I've kept all the tests. Why, I don't know. Maybe I just need to keep the two that show the positive effect and try to remember COVID. Remember COVID. It's hard to remember that we all went nuts with it. What it felt like to have COVID, and not just what it felt like to actually have it in your body, but to have it in the body politic, and to sort out the fact that we didn't want it, to recover, to vaccinate, to think about it, to receive it, to live it, to live with COVID. Are we still living with COVID? Or now much more serious diseases that are appearing on the horizon in McLuhan's global village that we live in? Anyway, I'm not quite sure what I can say about sentimentality, except that we all have it. And even if the object, like the crab shell, has no use value or no exchange value, it still has a symbolic value. And this is true of images as well. People clean their phones out, they get rid of all kinds, but they'll save that one photo, because that one photo reminds them and brings them back to a person that they loved or hated, brings them back to a place that they loved, brings them back to a day, an experience that they had, either alone or with other people. And it recalls what they felt. It's a way of taking us to a body memory of an emotion or a series of emotions that were felt by that experience. And we want to replicate that, even though we can never actually experience it again. And so we sort that into our saved photos. And maybe even we send it to somebody, or maybe we just save it. Or maybe we save it thinking that we might send it to somebody at some point. Or we send it to a group of people, or we post it somewhere on a platform. This attachment that we have, this sentimental attachment, is kind of gets underneath the root of this thing that human beings do. And it's true across cultures. The only people probably it doesn't apply to are nomadic peoples or people that are refugees and constantly on the move. And that is that we collect stuff. No matter where we seem to be, and no matter how humble the items that we collect stuff. We gather stuff to ourselves, to our places of, our domiciles, to our places of worship, or to our places of gathering. We gather stuff. Why do we do that? No other species really does that. Other species can use tools, can use things, can use objects to live, to eat, to kill if necessary, to harvest. But to just keep the object for its symbolic value, pretty sure there is no other species. I'd be interested to research that and try to understand if collecting is strictly a human thing. Let's say it this way, whether it is or not, we certainly collect on a scale that no other species does. So much so that we've actually created museums out of simple cabinet de curiosity cabinets that colonial people used to steal and borrow and take objects from other cultures that they eventually, after showing them and having too many of them, realized that they needed to put them somewhere. And that's how we birthed the idea of the museum. The museum being a place to show things that would not normally be seen in the culture. Taking things out of their cultural context, which is why it's such an irritant to so many peoples in the world. That's why they regard it as a stealing, and that they want those things back to be replaced, re-put in place into their cultural context, where the meanings of what they are can be renewed. Because when they're placed in their original cultural context, the meanings are different than they're in a museum. And this is the struggle of museology today, is to try to figure out, first of all, whether these stolen things really belong in museums, whether they should have been taken in the first place. And secondly, if they have permission to have these objects, if it's okay that they've got these objects stored, how then to display them, how to create the context or replicate the context in a way that is meaningful to the viewer, the participant, the audience. It's similar to, not the same as, but it's similar to the relationship that people who are into zoology face. The argument is always, why are these animals here? They're not in their natural habitat. You should never have brought them here. It makes no sense for them to be here. It's cruel and unfair to them. And then the other side is, yes, but if we didn't do this, other human beings would never see these animals. It helps to develop a sensitivity and an understanding of wild animals. And therefore we're actually doing something good, because we're helping species not to go extinct. We're creating an appreciation for the wildness of animals. And you can use both of those sides of those arguments to talk about objects in museums. One of the aspects of the new museology is to try to create a relationship to those objects that is open to people who are museum attendees. So to engage with them in a different way, to turn museum space, instead of being this elitist, white-walled, same with galleries, spaces that only certain people go to, that museums can become a place where people can have fun. That was a big part of the impetus among people who started the various science museums about 50 years ago. Bring kids in, bring people in to have fun, bring families in to have fun. Now, again, the argument is, well, if you sort things that way, then you're degrading the meaning of science. You're not taking it seriously enough. And on the other hand, well, you're exposing people to objects and experiences that they might not all otherwise have. So when these objects are taken out of their original cultural context, now I'm assuming from the point of view of not stealing it, they're still within their cultural context, but they're taken out of the immediate cultural context and put on display, they become kind of revered. If you think about, say, for example, the Mona Lisa. I've gone to see the Mona Lisa 3 times in my life. The first time, it seemed like people were actually interested in looking at it, even though you couldn't get that close to it. And they would walk around and look at it, and the occasional person would take a photograph. That was many years ago, decades ago. And then more recently, I arrived one day when I was living in Paris to look at it again, hordes of people all around. By this time it was even more protected behind glass, and pretty much everybody there was taking photographs of it. That seemed to be the most important thing, to take a photograph of the Mona Lisa and then later show your friends, hey, you know what, I was right in the presence of the Mona Lisa. And then the last time I went, a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, not only were people taking photographs, they were taking selfies. So they had their back to the actual work of art, had the work of art in the frame and themselves in the frame. And so what became more important than actually the work of art or viewing the work of art was the statement, look where I am, I'm here. I've had this experience, and elevate by posting that image to a level of like, I was going to say elitism. It's not really elite, but it's special. It's special in the sense that I'm here with the Mona Lisa, and if I can take the selfie in such a way that you don't see the hordes of people around me, it makes it seem even more special. I've had a privileged experience of being with the Mona Lisa, even though maybe I didn't actually look at it. And I certainly didn't appreciate it as a work of art, whatever that means. But I think what it means is having the time to look at the painting and try to interpret it and understand it through the lens that you bring to it. Obviously, we all bring different lenses to a work of art. That's a kind of sorting that is endemic to our age. And this relationship that we have with things has been altered historically, again, regardless of our tradition or the cultures that we come from, however long they go back in time. There was a time where we all of us, all of our ancestors were hunter-gatherers and sat around fireplaces and tried to communicate with one another. And so the question of the moon in the sky, which was just there, and maybe someone would point to it and someone else would look at it, one day became a spoken sound that was semiotically connected to it. So if I say moon, luna, whatever it was, and then that meaning is transferred to another person without the presence of the actual moon. So how was your sleep? Well, I didn't sleep that well because of the moon. And the moon is no longer visible because it's daylight, but people understood whatever that sound was. Some relationship that was one step removed. So we're one step removed from the actual thing. And then we lived our lives and the centuries passed, and people started developing scraping on walls or in the sand or however, something that we now call language, where the sound that was one step removed became 2 steps removed because we created a language, a word, if you will, not always a word, a symbol perhaps is a better way of thinking of it, which stands in for the sound, which stands in for the object itself. And that word abstracted us away from the source, but gave us a broader meaning that we could then communicate not only to the persons that were around us and heard the sound, but once the printing press was invented, to large numbers of people. So that's 2 steps removed. And now we live in a society where we don't need the printing press anymore. We create the word, either by typing or writing it, and we send it out literally for everybody maybe not everybody in the world, but billions of people to see it. And why it's significant now is not so much that that's a different archetype for communication, but rather when we send it out and we receive it, it's not at all clear whether it's real or not. It's not at all clear whether such and such an image or such and such a word actually existed. So you can have people, as we all know, with the slop, the AI slop that's everywhere now, that can be the fourth level of removal from the original idea. And that idea, that original idea, tends to kind of lose its meaning when we don't know if it's real or accurate, or even if it's a thing or not. Living in strange times. Not only are we abstracted from lived experience, we're not even sure what the lived experience is anymore. So the semiotic journey backwards from the screen to the word, to the sound, to the thing itself is become messed. It's become diffused, but also deliberately altered so that that relationship is broken. Broken. Can you hear? That relationship is broken. Broken. We don't know what's real. We don't know what's real. How do you live in a society without knowing what's real? I guess we're about to find that out. We're kind of already living that way. In here and out here. In here and out here. In here and out here. Out here. Out here and back around like that. Back in here. So when it gets back here, 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 it's already been distorted by here. Here. The feedback mechanism don't work anymore, don't work anymore, don't work anymore. How do we make sense of that? How do we understand that? How do we sort that when we're making meaning? Because sorting ultimately is about making meaning, about what we keep and what we don't keep, how we order our lives, how we order our friends, how we order our things, how we order our thoughts, how we order our ideas, how we order where we go or where we don't go. How do we order our feelings, our experiences? That's what sorting does. It leads us back to states, concomitant states that amalgamate into something that we call ourselves, that we live within. And then how do we make art from there? Thank you for listening in. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate my audience a lot.